Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week my first question comes from Ahoyerno, who says, finally a good movie question for me. Last week you talked about movie length best when it's around 90 minutes. I find a movie too short to tell many stories. Too many stories leave too many threads hanging. Unless the goal is to leave the audience with deep questions. Dark City, American Beauty, Stanley Kubrick. A series is often superior to a film. Lost is a good example of something that should have been a movie. What do you think? Well, I think it depends on the story. I think it depends on the storytellers. It's difficult for me to say, oh, series are better than movies or movies are better than series. It all very much depends on the content. Form and content should make sense when they're together, you know. I've seen movies, great movies, that have had many different stories going on at the same time. I mean, Robert Altman used to make movies like that all the time. He made movies like, Nashville or Gosford Park or Shortcuts that had lots and lots of stories sort of going at the same time. So it can work, and it has worked beautifully in the past. One of my favorite films of the last, really of my lifetime, that has been made in my lifetime, Magnolia by Paul Thomas Anderson, is very much like that. A big sprawling ensemble piece with many different stories going on in parallel to one another. So not all movies have to be unified and singular in terms of their stories, but that is a good rule of thumb. I do think it's a good rule, it's a good principle to go by, that if you're writing a movie, if you've decided that the best vehicle for your story is a movie, it should probably be a relatively straightforward, unified story about a single character or a group of characters and a single episode in the lives of these characters. And if you have something more sprawling in mind, then a series would probably be a better venue, a better form to tell that story. But it depends on the filmmaker, it depends on the story. And it also, if you're not looking at it from the storyteller point of view, if you're looking at it from the point of view of an audience member, it depends on your priorities. If you like long, detailed, sort of ongoing stories with lots of different characters, then maybe a well-done, well-written, well-performed series will appeal to you more than a film. It's very personal. It very much depends on the individual and on the story. Piker Eyes. Here's one for you, Steve. With the numerous presidential hopefuls declaring they are running for their party's nomination, who do you most want to announce they are running? Also, when it comes to voting, what are the three largest factors in who you decide to vote for or not vote for? Everybody on the left says Elizabeth Warren, so I will say that too. I would really love for Elizabeth Warren to run. Mostly as a matter of state pride, I would like to see Martin O'Malley run, and it looks like he's probably going to, because I'm from Maryland and O'Malley was the governor of Maryland, and I personally, in my own part of Maryland, and I'm from Western Maryland, which is the more rural, more conservative part of the state. Martin O'Malley is not terribly popular, but I thought he was a great governor. What three things do I look for when I'm deciding who to vote for, who to not vote for? Well, number one, I have to agree with them or think they're on the right track or have the right ideas on the issues. I try to vote against incumbents when I can. It gets more and more difficult. Sometimes you have to sort of decide whether the agreement on issues or the voting against incumbents is more important, and usually I fall on the side of, agreeing with a person on the issues is more important. And third, number three, it would be the third most important, but it would still be something I would consider, is just strategic voting. If the person I want to vote for is, say, an independent candidate, a third-party candidate, I have to kind of do a little calculation in my head and go, okay, will me voting for this person make it easier for this other person who I really don't want to win? And maybe instead of voting for the person I really want to win, I should vote for this other person who I can accept, but isn't my first choice, but has the best chance of winning. That's not an ideal situation. Ideally, I think you should vote for who you really think should win. You should really vote for the person you truly believe is the best choice. But there are times when voting strategically like that, I think, is reasonable and is responsible. Joseph Fabiano, hey Steve, what do you think about avant-garde? I recently switched majors from journalism to English with a minor in film, so I'm currently taking my first college film course, though I must admit I've been very well versed in movies since I was 16. One of the sections we've covered so far is avant-garde, and while I understand what it's trying to do, it just comes off to me as pretentious, unintentionally humorous, and difficult to connect with. I think it's a medium through which pretentious people can masturbate to their own false self-sophistication. Tree of Life and 2001: A Space Odyssey are a bit experimental, but at least their main concepts and basic ideas can be understood. Thoughts? It very much depends on the artist. I agree with you that a lot of avant-garde film or art film does seem just kind of self-congratulatory or just sort of out there and odd and inscrutable and mysterious for the sake of it, and you get the impression that it's not that the filmmaker has something to say in a really unique, personal, artsy way. It's just that they actually really don't have anything to say, and they're just, being strange for the sake of it. So yes, I agree with you on a lot of it. Some of it is lost on me. But I think it's important, and I think avant-garde filmmaking, art filmmaking, is an important form to work in, especially if you are aspiring to be a director. It can really help you to exercise your visual muscles. You might come up with a shot or a camera movement or a camera placement while making an avant-garde film when you're in film school that you will use later when you're making more disciplined, more narrative style films. You never know what you will learn while you're making an avant-garde film, or what you'll learn as a critic or as an audience member while you're watching one that will come back to help you out or to inform your experience or your opinion when you're watching movies later. I mean, every movie if you're an aspiring filmmaker or you are a lover of the movies and someone who just enjoys watching them and critiquing them and trying to understand them, any movie that you see, or in the case of a filmmaker, any movie that you make, will inform your opinion and will give you something that you didn't have before you saw or you made that movie. So even if it's a genre or a style that you don't really get or you don't really like or doesn't really do a whole lot for you, it always will yield something that you can use. It will always increase your knowledge or your skill set just for having seen it or having experienced it. So I wouldn't write it off completely. But I agree with most of what you're saying. There are times when it feels like it's just being experimental for the sake of being experimental, and it gets kind of sloppy and lazy, and it's not really art in its highest form, even though it might aspire to that. It's mostly just like you said. It's a form of artistic masturbation. Drew White, with respect to satire or social commentary, is it the responsibility of the creator to make something that the masses will accept, or is it the audience's fault for not understanding the message? I feel like I've given the same answer to several questions in this video already, but it really depends on the artist, on the satirist, and on the piece. I generally don't think that writers, artists, etc. need or should be expected to take the audience's sensibilities into consideration when they're making art. I think your number one responsibility, your number one duty, whether you are a writer or a visual artist of some kind or a filmmaker, is to the piece and to yourself and to your own intentions, whether you're trying to tell a story or send a message or share an experience or evoke a particular emotion, whatever you're trying to do with whatever you're working on, that should be your number one priority. Not, are people going to understand it? Are people going to get it? Because if you try to make art, if you try to write things or paint things or make films that everybody will understand, that's a recipe for making really bland, boring, shallow art. At some point you have to make a decision. You have to make choices that will allow your piece to speak to certain people and will also cut it off from certain people. Not everybody will get it. Not everybody will like it. Not everybody will appreciate it. It will not be acceptable to everybody's taste. That's just the way it is. The most important thing is, did it do what you wanted it to do? Did it get the message across that you wanted to send? And there are times when a satirist is maybe doing something for the wrong audience, and there are times when a satirist just isn't very skilled, just isn't doing a very good job, is maybe has chosen the wrong subject, or has approached things using the wrong tone, or has just made all kinds of bad decisions when creating his or her work of satire, and it is sort of the artist's fault. And there are other times when maybe it's just lost on the audience, when the audience just doesn't get it. And it depends. It depends on the work, and it depends on the artist. And it also depends on the audience. I might see a particular piece of satire and think it's hilarious, and if it was received badly, I might say, oh, well, it was just the wrong audience, or the people just didn't get it. You might see the same thing and go, oh, no, the audience had it right. This is fucking dog shit. So it varies widely. It's very subjective. You can't really talk about satire or any form of art in strong objective terms and say, well, this happens with it because of that, and this happens with it because of that, because it's all entirely subjective. What it is, whether it succeeds or fails, what we think about it, it's all completely subjective. So you can't really define it in those hard objective terms and say, well, if satire works, it's the fault. Or if satire doesn't work, it's the fault of the artist. Or if satire doesn't work, it's the fault of the audience. It can be either or both of those things, or neither of those things. It just depends. My dad took it too far when he gave me a goodnight kiss. Hey Steve, got a question. Please don't be offended, but sometimes I see so much anger and maybe hate, like when you said something about MRAs dying. Well, my question is, I know a few men's rights activists, including my brother, but they're also feminists. They believe in male and female equality, and in the grand scale, they believe women have it the worst, and the women's issues are more important. But even though they believe 90% women are mistreated, they still try to fight for that 5 to 10% of guys who are mistreated, such as male rape not being taken seriously, divorce and visiting children problems, domestic abuse, etc. Do you necessarily have problems with these kinds of men's rights activists who see women's rights as a bigger problem but also fight for the small problem men at times have instead of not doing anything? Thank you. If most men's rights activists were like you describe in your question, I would not have a problem with the men's rights movement in general. The problem I have with it is that the overall character of the movement is not defined by people like you describe your brother as being, who acknowledge the legitimacy and the importance of women's issues as well as men's issues, but people who pretend that women's issues don't exist, or that women's issues are trivial, and many even take a step beyond that and will say that the efforts to address women's issues in the past, or social movements like feminism, are actually responsible for the men's issues that they claim to be so concerned about. And that brings me to the other part that I really don't like about the overall character of the men's rights movement, which is I find it to be disingenuous about its concern over those men's issues. You mentioned things like perhaps inequality in divorce settlements or child custody settlements that may be due to gender issues, or the lack of taking male rape victims seriously, or the lack of taking male domestic abuse victims seriously. The men's rights movement likes to beat its chest and to pretend that it really just bleeds over these issues and it wants to help men who are suffering as a result of these sorts of problems. But I call bullshit on that. I don't think that, and I think there are probably individual men within the movement who do genuinely care. But as a whole, I do not think the men's rights movement really cares about any of those issues. I just don't see it spending that much time on them. I think it uses those issues as cover for what it's really there for, which is for aggrieved, bitter men to piss and moan about their ex-wives and their ex-girlfriends and how come they can't get laid. So when you hear me get angry or express, really animosity toward men's rights activists, it's not toward people like your brother. It's toward people who exploit the concerns of people like your brother to cover the fact that they just like to bitch and moan about women and spread misogyny and sexism and try to hide behind this facade of being a social justice movement when they are the furthest thing from it. Think skeptically. Steve, I'm a trans woman, as you know, and I wanted to know from your straight cis male perspective what you thought about men saying to me, oh my god, you used to be a guy? Ew, I can't be with you because I'm not gay. Seems a bit silly considering they wouldn't tell cis women, oh my god, you used to be a child? Ew, I can't be with you because I'm not a pedophile. Thoughts? P.S. Love your face. No. Thank you, Steph. I really like that metaphor, that analogy of, well, you wouldn't have a problem with a woman because she used to be a child. Why would you have a problem with a trans woman because you would say, oh, you used to be a man? That's a really great analogy. There was also something you said to me, or I think I saw maybe you posted on a Facebook post a little while ago, Steph, where you answered a question like this from somebody. They said, well, if I'm a straight guy and I'm attracted to a trans woman, does that make me gay? And you said, okay, think about what you're asking. You are asking if you as a man being attracted to a woman makes you gay. Sometimes a lot of cis men forget, or just don't know. It's not that they're forgetting, they just don't fucking know that the operative word in the term trans woman is woman. You're a woman. You're maybe a different kind of woman than a cis woman, but you're still a woman. That's the most important thing. And if you have a problem with the fact that a girl you like turns out to be trans, that's your fucking problem. And you should get over it. Or you should not take it out on the girl. Because that's not fair. That's a really fucking shitty thing to do. If you have a hang up, if you have an insecurity, and you take it out on the person instead of dealing with it yourself. That's your shit. That's your baggage. That's your bullshit. You shouldn't put your bullshit on another person. I think that what has to happen is just enough time has to go by, enough people have to get it through their head and sort of be able to normalize the notion of trans people being the gender that they identify as. Really, truly being the gender that they identify as, rather than the gender that they were born as or the gender they were assigned at birth. And once we get to that point where enough people have that mentality, where that adjustment has been made, then I think a lot of these hang-ups will disappear. But that's what has to happen. We cis people, we cis men especially, just have to get the fuck over it. The Trout Kitty. I'm a rational, skeptic atheist, but there's a rat in the community. When men like Aaron Ra talk about the possible future that could be had if countries were run by rationalists, he paints it as a beautiful thing, as though we don't have a huge issue with misogyny in our community, and that wouldn't carry over as a problem. If some people claiming to be rationalists, despite their hatred of gay people or a specific minority, started making videos about just how much they hate anyone but women, I think there would be a bigger backlash than calling their hatred baggage and leaving it at that. Isn't not having an issue with people who have an issue with women kind of an issue in itself? Yes, you're absolutely right. I think it is a black mark on our community. I think it is something that needs to be addressed, something that is being addressed, although perhaps not as comprehensively as we might like. And there's a little bit more resistance to it than you might wish there to be. Part of the problem is that we are just like any other community of people. There's nothing about the atheist or the free-thinking, skeptical community that inoculates us against sexism and misogyny. These are problems in society at large. Unfortunately, the way it worked out is some of the most popular and most influential YouTubers who are outspoken atheists also happen to have really, really shitty attitudes toward women and really shitty, embarrassing attitudes toward feminism, as you described in your question. And that has left a mark on the community. That has sort of dug us in a hole in terms of gender equality, in terms of the overall attitude that the community has toward women's issues, that we are still trying to climb out of. I think we are climbing out of it. I am at least that optimistic. I would like to see a similar effort to help us out with our anti-Muslim problem, because I think, unlike the criticism of much of Christianity, unfortunately a lot of the criticism of Islam within the atheist community has an uncomfortable resemblance to bigotry and racism in many cases, and I'm not comfortable with that either. I wish we would take care of that problem as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. not entirely sure where the thunder and lightning comes from, to be honest. I don't know if it's God or Thor or what, but I'm going to take that as a signal of affirmation that whatever it is that's sending that sound down agrees with you too. So there you go. It's validation from above. I don't know if that really means anything to atheists like us, but I'm going to say that it does. And I'm also going to say that it means that it's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
King Arfarazan. Hey Steve, I've been asking this question to basically every person on the planet recently, so I might as well ask it here. If you had to produce a historical drama TV series set in any period of time, what period of time would it be, and what would be the main focus of the series? Oh, and don't you dare say 19th century to early 20th century Britain, because those shows are fucking everywhere nowadays. They don't tell me what I can make my TV show about. I'll make it about whatever the fuck I want it to be about. If I want to make a TV show about 19th century Britain, that's what the fuck it's going to be about. I don't know. Maybe 1960s in the U.S. I just find that to be a fascinating time period. I mean, they've already done Mad Men, but that's sort of its own thing. I mean, yeah, I'm a sucker for NASA. I would love to do a TV series about the history of the space program. I know From the Earth to the Moon covered some of that, and that was fucking amazing. So I'm just saying I would love to do another show like From the Earth to the Moon, and that would be my period, like 1960s, early 1970s. DevShell 2, Steve, I always want to participate in these and never know what to ask. I sit and watch and give my potential questions a lot of thought, and I come up blank. Any suggestions? Yeah, just do what you just did. Just ask a bullshit question that doesn't really have a point just to get on the show. Because I'll get you on. I mean, I know you. You're my friend. There is such a thing as favoritism. And it works in your favor. I think that's why they call it favoritism. So yeah, just ask something. Just ask any old bullshit. I'll get it on. Don't worry. I'll hook you up. Seriously. Thomas Allister. Hey Steve, do you consider Jediism to be a religion or even a cult? No. And no. Hi Steve, Steven, Steve S, Master, etc. If Jesus, Muhammad, and Toby Benson were all drowning in a pool and you could only save two of them, what kind of sandwich would you make? P.S. Don't be one of those turkey-loving plebeians. Ham is the superior lunch meat. Thoughts? Well, first of all, this may be going beyond the constraints of your question, but I would save Toby Benson from drowning, first of all. And what kind of sandwich would I make as I was watching Jesus and Muhammad gasp their last breaths before they sink forever beneath the waves? Yeah, ham's all right. I don't know, country ham maybe. If it can stipulate that it's country ham, I'd make myself a nice country ham sandwich. Well, maybe it was a little bit of horseradish, nice slightly toasted bun, some Swiss cheese. Oh, God damn it. I want one of those now. I really need to go get me a good country ham sandwich. The Rusty Robot. Hey, Steve-O, what issues would you like to see a POTUS potential campaign on that would make you want to really get behind them 100%? Instead of picking the lesser of two evils, which is what we always seem to do come election day. If I'm just going completely like fantasy pie in the sky would never actually happen, the one issue that a presidential candidate could really get behind and campaign on that would win my everlasting admiration for them, especially if we're talking about like a Democratic candidate that would actually have a chance of winning the election, universal basic income. That would be the issue. If a major presidential candidate actually came out and pushed for universal basic income, that would be, I would be their supporter for life. Radical Bacon, you have to recast Star Trek the original series, but the only entities that came to the casting call are your stuffed animals, Jason's puppets, and the Muppets. Who would play Khan? Jack McPherson. I think that maybe Hans Krieger would read for it, but I don't think he would get it. I think it would be Jack McPherson playing Khan. Pagan Satanist, do you think a channel needs to have one series or main focus, or do you think it could be whatever uploaded whenever? Do you think my channel could still be considered a place for serious conversation if I also have comedy videos? Oh yes, of course. Comedy, the presence of comedy doesn't remove the possibility or rob you of any credibility when it comes to serious conversation. You could absolutely do both, especially if you're good at both. And I mean, what the fuck? Am I going to tell you that a channel has to have focus? Jeez, have you watched much shit on my channel, it's fucking all over the place. There needs to be thought behind it. I don't think you should just throw shit out willy-nilly with no rhyme or reason. But a channel can be topically and stylistically diverse. There's nothing wrong with that. Mr. C's 83. Hey Steve, happy 420. What are your opinions on the marijuana issue? You know, honestly, I don't care. I think it should be legalized. I think it should be decriminalized because I think it's ridiculous to send so many people to prison for smoking weed when it's not really any worse than drinking alcohol, and there are legal ways to do that. Why aren't there legal ways to buy and use marijuana? But beyond that, beyond sort of just supporting it in principle, I really don't have an emotional attachment to the issue. I've never smoked pot. I've never wanted to. I don't really care. But I do think it should be legal for the reasons I just said. Jason Bernay, Steve, I'm 34 years old and I just moved back in with my parent. I just started a job where I make half as much as my old job that laid me off, though it is a new career with potential for significant increases in pay. In fact, I make about what I made when I was 23. I feel like the last decade never even happened, but I'm magically older and fatter. And where did this dog come from? Got any words of wisdom to keep me from feeling like a complete and total failure? Well, sure. You have a dog, so your life is already kind of awesome, just with that baseline. And you know what? I'm just now getting to the point with the YouTube stuff where I'm making almost as much as I was when I was working at a truck stop when I was 25. But my life now is immeasurably better, both personally and professionally. And the reason why it's professionally better is because even though I'm not making a huge amount of money, I'm making a living, and I'm making a living doing something that I love, as opposed to something that I was just tolerating so I could make some money and pay some bills. Money isn't everything. If you're saying you feel like you've gone backwards because you're not making as much money, or you're making as much money as you were when you were 23, there are other measures of success. Maybe look at those other measures of success. Maybe you'll feel a little better. I hope you will, because I think you're awesome. JJ Talks, Dick Squad? Okay. Actually, JJ, you know what we should do? We should invent a game or a sport or something and call it Dick Squad. And then when we want to play it, we can invite each other to play just like that. Like people invite each other to play tennis. You know, like, hey, tennis? Hey, JJ, Dick Squad? We should do that. And then we can say that, and it'll be awesome. Hey, that's it for the questions. That's it for the lightning round. Before I get out of here, I'm going to do a shout out. The shout out this week goes to a really funny channel with a really funny show. And the channel and the show are both conveniently titled NewsUndies. NewsUndies is a weekly, roughly half hour long show. It's like a satirical news show. It's reading the headlines, telling the stories, some of which you've probably heard in the mainstream news, some of which maybe you haven't heard, they've been a little under the radar, and just making fun of shit that happens. Maybe you've heard of people that do this. It's a little bit like the Jon Stewart, the John Oliver, the Larry Wilmore, that sort of thing. Or maybe even like Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, only funny. NewsUndies, actually, it's really good. I've been watching it lately. I really enjoyed it. I've liked some of the writing on it. Good presentation. Paul, the guy who is on camera for it, the host of it, is really good. A great voice, really good camera presence, good delivery on the material, and I highly recommend it. NewsUndies. It has a shockingly small audience. You would think it would be a really big deal on the internet, at least a bigger deal than it is, but it should be. So my recommendation to you this week, my shout out goes to NewsUndies. Check it out. If you like it, if you think it's funny, subscribe to it and start watching the fucking thing, because I think it deserves a bigger audience than it has. So there you go. I'm gonna get out of here now. I'm gonna leave. I think I'm done with this for the week. I've given this about all I'm willing to give it for at least the next 7 days. So please leave a comment on this video. Ask me your question for next time. In order for me to do this 7 days hence, you have to ask. So leave a comment asking your question, for next time. Ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. You can even ask a single word question like Dick Squad, which wasn't even actually a question, and it might make it into the fucking video if I feel like it. That's just the way it works. It's completely arbitrary and capricious. So leave me your question for next time. Ask me anything about anything, and I will answer as many of them as I possibly can in the next video. Until then, thank you guys so much for watching. See you next time. Take care.